Silence filled the great hall of Axiom Prime as every delegate watched the impossible scene unfolding on the volcanic surface of Veth-4. The human champion knelt beside his fallen enemy and tended to wounds that the Vraxith warrior had sustained. During his desperate pursuit across the arena, Supreme Archon Krixthal stared at the display with compound eyes that could not process what they were witnessing. What is he doing? The Archon demanded. He has won. He should claim his victory and execute the defeated. No one answered because no one understood. The rules of the FNIU contest were clear that victory came when one champion could no longer continue. Vexenar lay motionless on the volcanic rock, his body completely exhausted, his systems failing from strain that his species had never evolved to endure. By every measure, the human had won. But instead of claiming his rightful trophy, Minjay worked carefully to stabilize his enemy's vital signs and treat the burns and scrapes that covered the Vraxith's armored body. Why are you doing this? Vexenar managed to ask through mandibles that could barely move. I would have killed you without hesitation. I have killed hundreds without hesitation. Minjay continued his work as he answered, That is exactly why I'm doing this. Humanity did not come to the stars to become another version of the Vraxith. We came to show that there is another way to be strong. He applied a cooling agent to a particularly severe burn on the champion's thorax. True apex predators do not need to kill everything weaker than themselves. They choose when to hunt and when to show mercy. The ability to destroy without the compulsion to do so is what separates dominance from mere violence. Vexenar lay still as these words echoed through his exhausted mind. In 300 years of Vraxith supremacy, no conquered species had ever shown mercy to a fallen warrior. The very concept was foreign to everything his civilization believed about power and strength. You have shamed me, the champion said with something that might have been despair. Death would have been honorable, but this kindness is humiliation beyond bearing. Minjay finished his treatment and sat back on his heels. That is where you are wrong. There is no shame in losing to a worthy opponent, only in refusing to learn from the defeat. He stood and offered his hand to the fallen champion. The contest is over. Humanity has won, but that does not mean we must be enemies. On Axiom Prime, the Solari ambassador wept openly as he watched. The human help his species would be executioner. To his feet, ambassador. Yunsari stood and addressed the assembly with quiet authority. The right of challenge has been satisfied. Humanity claims victory and demands that the Vraxith honor the agreed terms. The culling is cancelled and the Solari and the other targeted species will remain under the protection of the Galactic Concord. Krixthal rose slowly from his seat, and the entire assembly tensed for his response. The Supreme Archon could refuse to honor the agreement and plunge the galaxy into war. He could claim that the humans' tactics were dishonorable and therefore invalid. He could do many things that would demonstrate the Vraxith's continued power over weaker species. Instead, he bowed his great armored head in acknowledgement. The Dominion accepts the outcome. The culling is ended. Humanity has proven itself worthy of respect. The words sent a ripple of astonishment through the gathered delegates. In 300 years, the Vraxith had never once acknowledged another species as worthy of anything but contempt. However, Krixthal continued, I would know how this was possible. How did your champion defeat our greatest warrior? Without striking a single blow, Sari smiled and activated a display that showed human evolutionary history. Humans are persistence hunters. Millions of years ago, our ancestors learned to chase prey across vast distances until the target collapsed from exhaustion. We are not fast, but we do not stop. We are not strong, but we endure. We are not armored, but we adapt. She paused to let the information sink in. The Vraxith evolved as ambush predators, perfectly designed for quick, decisive kills. But you never needed endurance because your prey never escaped. Captain Cho simply ran until your champion's body failed. a strategy that no other species in the galaxy could have employed because no other species shares our evolutionary heritage. The assembly murmured as species that had never given humanity a second thought began to reconsider their assumptions. The soft, slow, weaponless creatures from Earth had just accomplished something that 46 other civilizations had considered impossible. They had broken the Vraxis' 300-year reign of terror. 1 month later, Captain Cho Min-jae stood in the observation deck of Axiom Prime and watched transport ships carry Silori refugees back to their home world. The immediate threat had ended, but the galaxy was still adjusting to the new reality that humanity had created. A familiar clicking sound announced the approach of someone Min-jae had not expected to see again. Dexanar walked with a slight limp from injuries that were still healing, but his posture carried none of the aggression that had marked their first encounter. Human, I wish to speak with you. Min-jae turned to face the champion who had once seemed like an unstoppable monster. Of course, I have spent my entire life believing that strength meant the ability to kill. That power meant the willingness to destroy. You showed me that these beliefs were incomplete. Dexanar paused as if the next words were difficult to form. I wish to learn more about your species, about this persistence that allows you to endure what others cannot. I wish to understand how mercy can be a form of strength. Min-jae considered the request for a long moment before nodding. Come to Earth with me. We have much to teach each other. Ambassador Yoon Seri watched the unlikely pair depart together and allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. Humanity had not just won a contest. They had planted a seed that might eventually transform the entire galaxy, because that was what persistence really meant. Not the refusal to stop fighting, but the commitment to keep trying until things got better. The Silori ambassador approached with gratitude shining in his large dark eyes. How can we ever repay what humanity has done for us? Seri placed a gentle hand on his scaled arm. Help us build something better. Stand with us when the next threat comes. Show the galaxy that friendship is stronger than fear. She looked out at the stars, where a billion worlds waited for news of what had happened on Veth4. This was just the beginning. And somewhere in the vast reaches of space, species that had spent centuries cowering before the Vraxith began to hope that change was possible, because if the soft, slow, weaponless humans could face down the galaxy's greatest predators and win through nothing but endurance and compassion, then perhaps the old rules no longer applied. Perhaps a better future was worth fighting for. Perhaps the galaxy's newest apex predators would teach them how. The third hour of the contest brought a change that rippled through the watching galaxy like a shockwave. Dexanar stumbled. It was small, barely noticeable to untrained eyes. But the billions of viewers saw the mighty Vraxith champion lose his footing on the volcanic rock and take an extra moment to recover his balance on Axiom Prime. The Vraxith delegation fell silent as their screens displayed biometric data that told a story they could not accept. Their undefeated champion was experiencing physical exhaustion. For the first time in his existence, this is impossible. Supreme Archon Krixthal declared, though his voice lacked the contempt it had carried at the start of the contest. Dexanar has fought battles lasting much longer than this. He has fought battles, the Cathari ambassador replied with analytical precision, but he has never sustained continuous pursuit for 3 hours without rest or recovery. His species is not designed for this type of exertion. The Silori ambassador watched with trembling hope as the small human continued his steady, relentless movement across the volcanic plain. Min-jae had not slowed at all. His pace remained exactly as it had been since the contest began, a rhythm that seemed mechanical in its consistency. The human's breathing was heavy, and his suit showed elevated stress indicators, but everything remained within sustainable parameters. He could maintain this pace for hours more if necessary. Dexanar could not. The Vraxith champion launched another charge, but this time Min-jae did not run. Instead, he sidestepped at the last moment, using a technique he had practiced thousands of times during his search and rescue training. A simple movement designed to avoid obstacles without breaking stride. Dexinar's blades cut through empty air, and the momentum of his attack carried him forward into a volcanic vent that spewed superheated gas across his exoskeleton. The champion roared in pain and frustration as he scrambled away from the vent. His armor protected him from serious injury, but the psychological damage was far worse than any physical wound he had missed. For the first time in 200 combat trials, the greatest warrior of the Vraxith Dominion had completely missed his target. Stand and fight, coward. Dexinar screamed at the retreating human. Face me with honor instead of running like the prey you are. Minje's response came through the arena communication system. Calm and measured despite his exertion. I am not prey. I am the hunter. You simply have not realized it yet. The words sent a visible shudder through the Vraxith delegation. On Axiom Prime, no species had ever dared to call themselves hunters. Compared to the Dominion, the very concept was absurd. But as the fourth hour began and Dexinar's movements became increasingly labored, the absurdity began to feel less certain. Minje changed his pattern now. Instead of fleeing in wide arcs across the arena, he began to circle back, always keeping distance but gradually decreasing the radius of his movement. He was closing in. The human was actually closing in on the Vraxith champion. What is he doing? The Marthan representative asked with genuine confusion. He had the advantage of distance. Why would he sacrifice it? Ambassador Yoon Seri answered with a smile that held no joy, only grim determination. Because running away was never the point. Captain Cho was not trying to escape the predator. He was tiring him out so that he could become the predator himself. On the arena floor, Dexinar felt something that his species had not experienced in 300 years of galactic dominance. He felt like prey. The human kept appearing at the edge of his vision, never close enough to attack, but always present, always watching, always following with that terrible steady pace that never changed and never stopped. Dexinar's body screamed for rest. His cardiovascular system was failing to provide adequate oxygen to his muscles. His exoskeleton felt like it weighed twice as much as it should. Every movement required conscious effort that drained his remaining reserves. And still the human followed, always following, never stopping. You cannot win this way. Dexinar gasped as he tried to create distance between himself and the relentless pursuer. Even if I fall, you do not have the strength to kill me. I do not need to kill you, Minje replied as he continued his steady advance. I only need to outlast you. The fifth hour brought the end. Dexinar's legs gave out as his exhausted body finally refused to carry him any further. He collapsed on the volcanic rock with his weapons still clutched in his claws, and his mandibles clicking weakly as he tried to rise. He could not. The greatest champion of the Vraxith Dominion, undefeated in 200 trials, responsible for crushing entire resistance movements, lay helpless on the ground as a single soft, slow, weaponless human walked toward him with steady, measured steps. Minje approached his fallen opponent without fear or triumph in his expression. He stopped a few meters away and studied the creature who had been proclaimed invincible by a galaxy that had never understood what true predators looked like. You lost because you never had to fight for survival, Minje said. Everything came easy to your species, so you never learned to endure hardship. Humans were never the strongest or the fastest, so we learned something far more valuable. He knelt beside the fallen champion. We learned to never give up. The galaxy waited for the killing blow that would end the contest and confirm humanity's victory. 12 billion viewers Across 47 civilizations held their breath as the human reached toward his defeated enemy. And then Minjay did something that no one expected. He pulled a medical kit from his suit and began treating Dexanar's wounds. The planet called Veth-4 was a nightmare world of black volcanic rock and poisonous atmosphere where nothing could survive without environmental protection. The Galactic Concord had chosen it, specifically because neither species could claim any natural advantage from the terrain and because the harsh conditions would test both champions. Equally 12 billion viewers across 47 civilizations watched as the transport ships descended through clouds of sulfuric gas toward the designated arena, a vast plain of hardened lava surrounded by active volcanic vents that periodically spewed molten rock into the orange. Sky Captain Cho Min-jae stood at the viewport of his ship and studied the landscape where he would either save humanity or doom it to servitude. Under the Vraxith Dominion, his environmental suit was standard military issue, designed to protect against the toxic atmosphere but offering no enhanced strength or weapon systems. The rules of the contest were clear on this point, and humanity had followed them precisely across the plain. He could see the Vraxith transport landing and knew that Dexanar would be preparing for what the champion surely believed would be an easy victory. Captain, the arena officials have confirmed that both parties are ready, his communication officer reported. The contest will begin in 30 minutes. Min-jae nodded and continued his study of the terrain. Every volcanic vent, every ridge of hardened lava, every unstable patch of ground registered in his mind as he built a mental map of the battlefield. Captain, may I speak freely? The officer asked. Of course. The crew wants you to know that whatever happens down there, we are proud to have served with you. You did not choose this fight, but you accepted it without hesitation, and that means something to all of us. Min-jae turned from the viewport and offered a small smile. Tell the crew that I have no intention of dying today. The Vraxith believe that strength and speed determine victory, but they have never faced an opponent who refuses to give up. The transport landed at the designated coordinates, and Min-jae stepped out onto the black volcanic surface where the heat from the ground seeped through his suit despite its insulation. He carried nothing with him, no weapons, no equipment, nothing but the suit that kept him alive in the hostile environment. Across the arena he could see Dexanar emerging from the Vraxith transport. And even at this distance, the champion was terrifying. To behold the alien warrior's exoskeleton gleamed dark crimson in the orange light, and his forearms carried traditional Vraxith weapons, curved blades designed specifically for cutting through flesh and bone with maximum efficiency. Ambassador Yoon Seri watched from Axiom Prime, where a massive display showed the arena to the assembled Concord delegates, the Silori. Ambassador sat beside her with trembling hands and tear-filled eyes as he watched the small human figure standing alone against the monster that would determine his species' fate. He carries no weapons, the Silori whispered. How can he fight without weapons? He does not intend to fight, Seri replied with a calm she did not entirely feel. He intends to win, which is an entirely different thing. On Veth-4, the arena officials announced that the contest of dominance had officially begun. Dexanar moved immediately, crossing the distance between them with explosive speed that covered the ground faster than any human could run. His blade sang through the poisonous air as he struck at the spot where Min-jae had been standing. But Min-jae was no longer there. The human had started running the moment the contest began, not toward his opponent but away from him, using every feature of the terrain to break line of sight and create distance. Dexanar pursued with a hiss of contempt that translated through the broadcast systems for the watching galaxy to hear. You run like prey, little human." I expected at least some pretense of courage. Minjay did not respond as he continued to move across the volcanic plain, his pace steady and measured despite the heat and the difficult terrain. The first hour passed and then the second, and still the human refused to engage. Dexinar charged again and again, each time coming close enough to strike, but never quite close enough to land a killing blow, as Minjay used the volcanic vents and ridges and unstable ground to stay just beyond reach. The watching galaxy grew restless as the chase continued. "This is cowardice," the Vraxith delegation declared on Axiom Prime. The human shamas his species by fleeing from honorable combat. Other delegations murmured agreement as they watched the seemingly pathetic display of the small human running from the vastly superior predator. But some observers noticed something that the others did not. The Cathari ambassador, a species of analytical beings who measured everything in mathematical terms, leaned forward in her seat with growing interest. "The human's pace has not changed," she observed to no one in particular. "He has been moving at exactly the same speed for over 2 hours." Beside her, the Morathan representative consulted his own data displays and confirmed the observation. "You are correct. His biometrics show elevated heart rate and respiration, but within sustainable parameters." The Vraxith champion, however, shows signs of increasing strain. On the arena floor, Dexinar launched another explosive charge at the retreating human, and this time his movements were noticeably slower than they had been at the start of the contest. The Vraxith champion's biology was built for quick, decisive kills, not extended pursuit. His exoskeleton generated enormous heat during exertion, and his cardiovascular system was designed to provide massive bursts of power, followed by periods of rest and recovery. He had never needed endurance because no prey had ever escaped him long enough to matter. Minjay glanced back at his pursuer and noted the slight hesitation in the alien's movements, the barely perceptible decrease in speed that would have been invisible to anyone who had not spent weeks studying Dexinar's exact movement patterns. The hunt was working, but the human knew better than to feel hope just yet. Dexinar was still incredibly dangerous, and a single mistake would mean instant death. So Minjay continued to run, not fast, but steady, always steady, using the endurance that millions of years of human evolution had built into his very bones. Behind him, the galaxy's greatest predator began to feel something that no Vraxith had experienced. In 300 years of unchallenged dominance, he began to feel afraid. The selection committee met in a secure bunker beneath the mountains of Korea, where the world's most powerful military leaders and scientists had gathered to make the most important decision in human history. General Park Jun-ho presided over the assembly with calm authority, despite the chaos that had erupted across Earth since Ambassador Yoon Seri's transmission arrived. Every nation wanted their champion to represent humanity, and every nation believed their candidate was the obvious choice. The Americans had put forward their most decorated special forces operator, a man who had completed missions that remained classified at the highest levels and who had personally eliminated more enemy combatants than anyone cared to count. The Russians offered a soldier who had survived conditions that should have killed any normal human, a warrior forged in the harshest environments Earth could produce. China presented a martial artist whose mastery of ancient combat techniques was considered supernatural by those who had witnessed his skills. Dozens of other candidates filled the screens around the room, each one representing the pinnacle of human violence and combat capability. General Park reviewed them all with careful attention before setting aside every single file. "None of these candidates are suitable," he announced to the stunned assembly. The American Representative stood with barely controlled anger visible. On his face, General Park, with respect. These are the finest warriors humanity has ever produced. Any one of them would be capable of defeating whatever monster the Vraxith send against us. No, Park replied with quiet certainty. They would not. And that is precisely the problem. He activated a holographic display that showed that Vraxith champion the Dominion had selected Dexanar stood before them in recorded footage from his previous combat trials. A nightmare of armored plates and razor, claws and venomous mandibles that moved with terrifying speed and precision. This creature has killed 200 opponents in formal combat, Park explained. He has personally crushed resistance movements on 3 occupied worlds. He is faster than any human by a significant margin, stronger by orders of magnitude, armored against most weapons we could bring to the arena, and venomous enough to kill with a single scratch. The room fell silent as the recording showed. Dexanar dismembering an opponent nearly twice his size in under 30 seconds. If we send our strongest fighter, our fastest warrior, our most skilled killer, we will be playing the Vraxith's game, Park continued. And we will lose because they have spent 300 years perfecting that game. Then what do you suggest? The Chinese representative asked with genuine curiosity replacing his earlier skepticism. Park changed the display to show a different file entirely. Captain Cho Min-jae appeared on the screen. A lean man in his early 30s, with kind eyes and an unassuming presence that seemed almost ridiculous compared to the warriors who had been discussed before him. This is our champion, Park announced. The room exploded into protests and accusations and demands for explanation. That took several minutes to quiet. This man is a search and rescue specialist, the Russian representative finally managed to say. His record shows no combat decorations, no confirmed kills. Nothing but humanitarian missions and disaster responses. Exactly, Park replied. He pulled up Minja's complete service record and highlighted specific entries that told a different story than raw combat statistics could capture. Captain Cho once tracked a group of lost hikers through mountain terrain for 72 hours without rest. He located and rescued survivors from a collapsed building after working continuously for 4 days. He pursued a kidnapper across 3 countries over the course of 2 weeks and never once lost the trail. These are admirable qualities, the American representative admitted. But they will not help him kill a Vraxith warrior. We are not trying to kill the Vraxith warrior, Park said. We are trying to survive him. He brought up biological data on the Vraxith species that human scientists had compiled over 2 centuries of observation. The Vraxith evolved as ambush predators on a world where prey was plentiful and competition was fierce. They developed incredible speed, devastating natural weapons, and the ability to kill quickly and efficiently. But they never needed to develop endurance because their prey never escaped long enough to require sustained pursuit. Park switched to data on human physiology. Humans evolved on a world where we had no natural weapons, no armor, no venom, no claws. So we developed something else entirely. We became persistence hunters. Our ancestors would track prey across the savannah for days, never stopping, never resting, until their target simply collapsed from exhaustion. The room was silent as the implications began to sink in. Captain Cho Min-jae has spent his entire career demonstrating the one trait that makes humans unique in this galaxy, Park concluded. We do not give up, we do not stop. And when we start pursuing something, we do not rest until we achieve our goal. The transmission reached Min-jae while he was coordinating flood relief efforts in Southeast Asia. He read the orders twice before setting down his communication device and looking out at the water that still covered the streets. of the small village he had been working to save. His commanding officer approached with confusion on her face. "What is it, Captain?" "I have been selected to represent humanity in a combat trial against the Rexith Dominion." Minjay replied in a tone that suggested he was still processing the information himself. But you are not a combat specialist." Minjay nodded slowly as understanding began to form in his mind about why he had been chosen. "No, I am not. Which is precisely why they need me." He spent the transport back to Korea, studying everything humanity knew about the Rexith, their biology, their culture, their psychology, their history. He watched every available recording of the Dashnar's previous victories, analyzing the champion's movements and patterns and tendencies, until he knew them better than the Rexith knew himself. His trainers grew increasingly concerned as the weeks passed, and Minjay showed no interest in combat preparation. "Captain, you need to practice fighting techniques," one instructor insisted. "You cannot defeat that creature with knowledge alone." Minjay looked up from his studies with a calm expression that seemed entirely inappropriate for a man preparing to face certain death. "I have no intention of fighting him." "Then, what exactly is your strategy?" Minjay returned his attention to the data scrolling across his screen. "The Rexith have been predators for so long that they have forgotten what it means to be prey," he said. "Daxanar has never experienced fear because he has never faced something that could threaten him." He paused on an image of the Rexith champion in mid-strike. Claws extended, mandibles dripping venom. "I'm going to teach him what fear feels like." The night before his departure for the contest world, Minjay received a personal message from Ambassador Yoon Seri. "I am sorry for putting this burden on you, Captain. I acted without thinking, and now humanity's future rests on your shoulders." Minjay recorded a reply that he sent before boarding the transport that would carry him to either victory or death. "Do not apologize, Ambassador. You stood up for people who could not stand up for themselves. That is exactly what humanity should do. And I intend to prove that the galaxy made a mistake when they dismissed us as weak." He settled into his seat as the ship lifted off and closed his eyes to rest. He would need all his strength for what was coming. The great station called Axiom Prime floated at the center of neutral space, where no species could claim ownership and where all species could meet as equals. At least in theory. Ambassador Yoon Seri stepped off the human transport shuttle and felt the weight of alien eyes upon her from every direction as she walked through the massive docking bay toward the central chamber where the Galactic Concord held its emergency sessions. She was young for a diplomat, barely 40 years old in a profession where most representatives had centuries of experience behind them. But humanity had only been part of the galactic community for 200 years, and the other species did not consider Earth important enough to warrant a senior ambassador. The Concord consisted of 47 spacefaring civilizations, and humanity ranked somewhere near the bottom of that list in terms of power and influence and respect. Today, the Great Hall buzzed with tension that Sari could feel like electricity against her skin as she took her seat in the human delegation's modest section near the back of the enormous circular chamber. At the center of the room stood a raised platform where the Supreme Archon of the Rexith Dominion addressed the assembly with a voice that clicked and hissed through the universal translators. Krixthal was terrifying to behold even through the safety of distance and diplomatic protocol. He stood nearly 3 meters tall, with an exoskeleton of dark crimson plates that could stop most projectile weapons, and his 4 arms ended in claws that had personally torn apart hundreds of enemies across his long career. The Rexith had ruled as the galaxy's unchallenged apex predators for 300 years, and every species in the Concord understood that their position existed only because the Rexith allowed it to exist. The Dominion has determined that 3 species have reached evolutionary dead ends. Krixthal announced with casual contempt dripping from every translated word. The Siluri, the Mithrani, and the Vexel serve no purpose in the galactic order, and their continued existence wastes resources that could benefit stronger civilizations. A murmur of fear rippled through the assembly, but no one spoke against the declaration because no one ever spoke against the Vraxith. Sari felt her hands clench into fists beneath the table as she thought about the Siluri. Gentle aquatic beings who had welcomed humanity's first explorers with open arms and taught them how to navigate the complex politics of galactic society. The Siluri ambassador, a graceful creature with iridescent scales and large dark eyes, sat frozen in terror as his species' death sentence was pronounced before the silent assembly. The culling will begin in one standard galactic month. Crixthal continued. This is not a matter for debate, but rather a notification of dominion. Intent, Sari stood before she could stop herself, and felt every eye in the chamber turn toward the small human woman, who dared to rise while the Supreme Archon was speaking. The human delegation objects? She said in a voice that somehow remained steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. Crixthel's compound eyes focused on her with an expression that might have been curiosity or might have been the way a predator looks at particularly bold prey. The human's object, he repeated with amusement clicking through his mandibles. How entertaining that the soft little creatures from that unremarkable world think their objection matters to the Dominion. Laughter echoed from the Vraxith delegation, and several other species joined in. Eager to align themselves with power, humanity has maintained friendship with the Siluri since our first contact with galactic civilization. Sari continued. We will not stand silent while our friends are murdered. And what exactly will humanity do to stop us? Crixthal asked as he descended from the platform and approached her section with slow, deliberate steps. Your species has no natural weapons, no armor, no venom, no claws. You are among the weakest beings ever to achieve spaceflight, and you presume to challenge the Dominion. Sari's heart pounded so hard she was certain every species with enhanced hearing could detect it, but she refused to step back as the massive predator loomed over her. I invoke the right of challenge, she said. The chamber fell absolutely silent, as if every being had simultaneously forgotten how to breathe. The right of challenge was ancient, older than the current Concord, a provision written into galactic law during an era when disputes between species were settled through direct combat rather than political maneuvering. No one had invoked it in over 1,000 years, because no one had been foolish enough to challenge a species they could not hope to defeat. Crixthal stared at her for a long moment and then began to laugh. A horrible clicking sound that echoed through the silent chamber. You invoke the right of challenge against the Vraxith Dominion, he said with something like delight in his translated voice. Your species truly does not understand its place in the galaxy. Do you accept or refuse? Sari asked. If you refuse, then the Concord will note that the mighty Vraxith were afraid to face humanity in honorable combat. The laughter stopped instantly, and Crixthal's posture shifted into something far more dangerous. The Dominion accepts, he hissed. We will choose our champion within one standard day, and the contest of dominance will determine which species submits to the other. I hope you understand what you have wagered, little human. When we win, and we will win, humanity will forfeit its seat on the Concord and submit to Vraxith judgment. And when we win, Sari replied, the culling ends and the Siluri and the others remain under our protection. Agreed, Crixthal said before turning away. Prepare your champion, though I cannot imagine what pathetic creature you will send to die. As the assembly dissolved into chaos around her, Sari felt the Siluri ambassador approach with tears streaming from his large dark eyes. Why would you do this? He asked in a trembling voice. You have doomed your own species to save mine. Sari placed a gentle hand on his scaled arm and smiled, despite the terror still churning in her stomach, because that is what friends do, she said, and because humanity has a few surprises that the galaxy has not yet seen. She only hoped that was true as she sent an emergency transmission to Earth explaining that she had just wagered humanity's entire future on a fight they had 1 month to figure out how to win. The message reached General Park Junho within the hour, and as he read the ambassador's report, he felt something strange and unexpected rising in his chest. It was not fear or despair or anger at the young diplomat's reckless action. It was hope, because Park Junho knew something that the Vraxith and the rest of the galaxy had never bothered to learn about. The soft, slow, weaponless creatures from Earth humanity had not clawed its way to the top of their planet's food chain by being the strongest or the fastest or the most heavily armored. They had done it by being something far more dangerous. They had done it by being persistent,